The night my porch lights flickered 3 times in a row, I knew trouble was coming. My grandfather used to say, when the house shakes and the lights flicker, it means the past is waking up. And sure enough, by the next morning, I was standing at the edge of our family's lake, staring down a group of strangers in business suits, HOA board members telling me I didn't belong on my own ranch now. Before I tell you how far they went, even calling 911 to try to drag me off the land my family bled for, you need to understand one thing. This ranch, this lake, it wasn't just property, it was a promise. My grandfather carved it out of nothing but grit and prayer. My father guarded it with his bare hands. And when the old man passed, he made me swear I'd never let a soul take it from us. Not an outsider. Not a neighbor. And certainly not a smug HOA that thought they could rewrite history. It started small. A letter taped to my gate. Bright paper? Big block letters. Notice, unauthorized occupation of HOA common property. Remove all equipment within 30 days. I nearly laughed. Except my blood was boiling. The letter claimed that the lake, the same lake my grandfather stocked with catfish in the 1950s, the same lake where I taught my daughter how to skip rocks, was community property, according to them. I was trespassing. Now, I don't know about you, but if you've ever had an HOA breathing down your neck, you know they start small. They send letters. They demand compliance. They call meetings where they pretend to be polite, but every word drips with arrogance. And that's exactly what happened here. But this wasn't about lawn height or paint colors. This was my family's land. And when I found out what they were really after, my hands shook with anger. They didn't just want to control the lake. They wanted to drain it. To pave it. To develop it into some shiny, soulless lakeside townhouses. My grandfather's lake turned into parking lots and balconies. Can you imagine? I confronted them the next morning. They were standing at the lake's edge, clipboards in hand. One of them, a woman I'll call Karen, because she had that exact pinched face and smug tone you're already picturing, pointed her finger at me like I was a criminal. "This water belongs to the community now," she said. "You're in violation of HOA covenants." I felt my throat tighten. Community. My grandfather built this dam. My family pays the taxes. You don't own a drop of it, Karen smirked. "We'll see about that." I went home shaking. Not with fear, but with rage. I sat on my porch swing looking at the willow tree where my father carved our initials. I remembered Sunday afternoons when neighbors, real neighbors, not these HOA vultures, would bring lemonade and sit by the lake. Back then, community meant sharing, not stealing. My heart ached. How could anyone be so blind to history, to sacrifice? I poured myself a cup of coffee and thought of my daughter, Sarah. She's grown now, with a family of her own, but I could still see her as a little girl holding up the first catfish she caught. That photo still hangs in my hallway, and I promised myself I'd be damned before I let anyone take that memory from her. A week later, they escalated. They called a special meeting at the HOA clubhouse. I wasn't invited, but word travels fast in small towns. One of my old fishing buddies who lived inside their subdivision called me after. "They're talking about filing a police report," he whispered. "They say you're squatting on HOA land?" I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the phone. Squatting? On my own ranch? But deep down I knew it wasn't funny. I knew what came next. These people weren't just neighbors. They were schemers. And schemers, when cornered, get desperate. That's when I noticed the SUV parked across from my driveway. Tinted windows. Engine running. It was there for 3 nights in a row, watching, taking notes. My gut twisted. They weren't just filing papers. They were preparing for a fight. And they were about to find out who they picked a fight with. I drove out to the old barn that night. Inside I kept the documents. My grandfather left me hand-drawn maps, tax receipts going back to the 1940s, even the original bill of sale for the land and water rights. As I flipped through the yellowed pages, I felt my chest tighten with pride. My grandfather's handwriting was shaky, but firm. For my children, and their children, and theirs after. I whispered to the rafters, "Don't worry, Grandpa. I've got this." The next morning, the HOA showed up in force. 3 cars, clipboards, Karen in the lead, of course. They marched right up my gravel driveway as if they owned it. My dogs barked until their throats were raw. I stood at the porch, arms crossed. Karen shouted, "We've given you notice. If you don't vacate the lake by the end of the month, we'll take legal action." I held up my grandfather's deed like a sword. "You see this? My family signed this before your subdivision even existed. You don't own a single blade of grass here." Her smile faltered, but only for a second. Then she whispered to the man beside her, loud enough for me to hear, "Call 911. And that's when it happened. I heard the man pull out his phone. I saw his thumb hover over the screen. They were really going to do it. They were going to call the cops. On me. On my own land, what they didn't know, and what I wasn't about to tell them just yet, was that when you call 911 in this county, the call doesn't go to some stranger in a faraway city. It goes straight to my office, because I'm the emergency dispatch supervisor, and the moment their call came in, I'd be the one picking up. The phone rang on my desk, and the caller ID told me everything I needed to know. It was them, the HOA, Karen's crew. The same people standing on my ranch driveway, pretending to own my family's lake, were now calling 911 to try and get me thrown off my own land. I picked up, voice steady, but heart pounding. 911, what's your emergency? A pause. Then Karen's voice, sharp and smug. Yes, I'd like to report a trespasser. He's refusing to leave HOA common property. He's armed with dogs. My old hounds who wouldn't hurt a fly unless it tried to steal food off the porch. My jaw clenched so hard, I thought my teeth might crack. I leaned back in my chair, letting her words pour through the headset. She described me like a criminal. Tall man, beard, possibly dangerous. He's threatening HOA board members. Every syllable twisted my stomach tighter. I wanted to scream into the line. That's me you're describing. That's my land. That's my home. But instead, I wrote down every word. Every accusation. Every lie. Because now I had them. On record, you see, when you're in emergency dispatch, every call is recorded. Every false claim. Every exaggeration. And making a false report isn't just bad manners. It's a crime. Karen didn't know it, but in that moment, she'd handed me the rope she'd used to hang herself. Still, as I listened, I felt something heavier than anger pressing on me. It was sadness. Deep, aching sadness. Because what kind of neighbor does this? What kind of person decides to tear apart a family's history just to build condos? I could picture my grandfather shaking his head. He always said, "Land's not just dirt and water. It's memory. It's blood. You lose that, you lose yourself." And I wasn't about to lose. That night, I drove home from the dispatch office, headlights sweeping across the gravel road. The ranch was quiet, except for the crickets and the low croak of frogs by the lake. I parked by the old willow tree and sat there. Staring at the water, I thought of my father teaching me how to mend a fishing net by lantern light. I thought of my daughter Sarah, back when she was 6, running barefoot across the dock, laughing so hard she almost fell in. I thought of every Sunday dinner we ate on that porch, passing cornbread and stories around the table, and now some HOA was trying to erase it all. Tears burned my eyes, but I blinked them back. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to fight. The next morning, Karen returned, this time with 2 police officers. Blue lights flashing across my pasture. Neighbors from the subdivision lined up at the fence, whispering, pointing. Some filming on their phones. I stepped onto my porch. Steady as stone. One officer, young and polite, said, "Sir, we received a call about trespassing." I held up the deed. "This is my property. Been in my family for generations. You can read it for yourself," Kieran butted in, voice dripping venom. "He's lying. That lake was deeded to the HOA. He's refusing to comply." I could see the officer's face twitch. He didn't believe her. But procedure was procedure. He asked for ID. I handed it over. And then I dropped the bomb. I'm also your dispatch supervisor. I took your call last night. The whole thing's recorded. Every word of her false report. Silence was electric. Neighbors gasped. One of the officers raised his eyebrows. Karen's face went pale, then red, then pale again. She stammered. That's not possible. He's making it up. But the officer shook his head. Ma'am, false reporting is a serious offense. If this man's claim checks out, you could be facing charges. I've never seen someone deflate faster. Karen's shoulders sagged, but her eyes still burned with hate. She wasn't done. Not yet. The HOA doubled down. Over the next week, I got letter after letter. Threats of lawsuits. Threats of liens. They even tried to fine me for blocking access to the lake, except the only access they had was trespassing across my ranch. One night, I caught two of them sneaking down the embankment with flashlights, measuring tape in hand. I shouted, and they ran like scared deer. My blood boiled hotter than it ever had. I called the sheriff myself. And when his truck pulled up, I handed him the recording of Karen's 911 call. She lied. She tried to weaponize law enforcement against me. And now they're trespassing. He nodded slowly, chewing his gum. We'll take care of it. But even with the sheriff on my side, the weight on my chest didn't lift. That lake wasn't just mine. It was my family's legacy. And every night, I felt like I was letting them down by even entertaining this circus. I dug out my grandfather's old fishing hat. The brim was frayed, sweat-stained, but when I put it on, I swear I could hear his voice in the wind. Stand tall, boy. This land's yours. Don't let them scare you. So I stood taller. The HOA, cornered and embarrassed, decided to play dirty. They spread rumors around town. Said I was violent. Said I was unstable. Said I was hoarding weapons on my ranch. Neighbors who once waved at me now crossed the street. At the diner, I felt eyes on me, whispers behind coffee cups, and that hurt worse than anything. Worse than lawsuits, worse than lies, because in a small town, your name is everything. And they were dragging mine through the mud, but I wasn't going to let them win. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the lake, headlights appeared at the end of my driveway. A convoy. 5 HOA cars, lined up like a parade of vultures. Karen stepped out, a smug smile plastered back on her face. She called out, "We've got the paperwork. Tomorrow, we're filing for control of this lake. You'll be out within the month." I didn't answer. I just held up my phone, still recording. And deep down, I knew something she didn't. Because I had more than recordings. More than deeds. I had a plan. A plan that would end this war once and for all. And when it was over, Karen and her HOA wouldn't just be embarrassed. They'd be finished. The morning of the hearing, I woke before dawn. The air was cold, still heavy with the weight of everything riding on this day. My grandfather's hat sat on the kitchen table. I picked it up, dusted it off, and said quietly, "This is for you, old man." The HOA thought they had me cornered. Karen had boasted about it in front of neighbors, waving around a stack of papers, like she already won. They believed their lies, their rumors, their threats would finally drive me out. But what they didn't know was that I had been preparing. I drove into town, documents in hand. Not just the deed, not just the maps, but the recording of Karen's 911 call, where she painted me as some dangerous trespasser on my own land. I had every lie she'd told, every false report, every smear campaign, all lined up like dominoes, waiting to fall. When I walked into that county office, heads turned. Some whispered, some avoided my eyes, but I didn't waver. My boots echoed against the tile as I entered the hearing room. At the front sat the county commissioner, a man who'd known my family since I was a boy. On one side, me, alone. On the other, Karen and the entire HOA board, smug smiles plastered across their faces. Karen leaned over the table and sneered, "Ready to lose your little pond?" I just stared back. "That's not a pond. That's my family's lake." The commissioner cleared his throat. "We're here today to determine rightful ownership of the body of water known as Miller Lake." Karen's attorney sprang up, spouting off about community rights and common access and how I was violating HOA covenants. He talked fast, trying to bury the truth in legal jargon. Neighbors in the audience nodded, unsure, swayed by the sound of confidence. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, held up the original deed, the tax receipts, the maps my grandfather had drawn. I spoke plain, clear. This land has been in my family for 3 generations. We built it. We maintained it. We paid every dime of tax on it since 1946, and when these people couldn't bully me with letters, they tried to weaponize law enforcement against me. I have the 911 call to prove it. Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's face drained of color. I pressed play. Karen's voice filled the chamber. Yes, I'd like to report a trespasser. He's dangerous. He's refusing to leave HOA property. Then my own calm voice. 911? What's your emergency? The realization hit everyone at once. They hadn't just lied. They'd tried to manipulate the very system designed to protect the community. And the call had come straight to me. The commissioner's brow furrowed. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. Mrs. Whitman, is this your voice? Karen stammered. I was misinformed. No, I cut in, voice steady. You were lying. And you tried to ruin my name, my family's honor, and my life's work. The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. For a long moment, the commissioner just stared at her. Then he said the words I'll never forget. This hearing is over. Ownership belongs to the Miller family. HOA claims are denied. And as for false reporting, the sheriff's office will be in touch. Karen's jaw dropped. Her board members looked away, suddenly very interested in the floor tiles. Neighbors in the back whispered. Some even clapped quietly, for the first time in months. I felt like I could breathe, but it didn't end there. Oh no, the sheriff did call, and Karen was charged for filing a false police report. The HOA's reputation tanked overnight. Families who'd once believed their lies started resigning from the board. Some even came by my ranch to apologize. One neighbor, an old man with trembling hands, stopped me at the diner. I should have spoken up sooner, he said. Your daddy taught me how to fish at that lake. I knew it was yours. I shook his hand and told him it was all right. Because deep down, I knew the truth always finds its way. That weekend, I invited my daughter Sarah and her kids over. We grilled catfish by the lake, the same way my grandfather used to. The grandkids ran barefoot across the dock, laughing like echoes of the past. Sarah hugged me and whispered, Dad, you did it. You kept your promise. I looked out over the water, the sunset painting it gold, and I felt my grandfather there. Not in some ghostly way, but in the memories, the traditions, stubborn pride he'd planted in me. We sat under the willow tree, passing cornbread and stories around the table, just like old times. And for the first time in months, I felt peace. You know, folks, I learned something through all this. Land, houses, lakes, they're not just property lines on a map. They're pieces of who we are. They hold our memories, our dignity, our family pride, and when someone tries to take that from you, you can't just roll over. You have to stand tall, even when it hurts, even when the whole town whispers against you, because in the end, truth has a way of rising. Just like water, so if you've ever dealt with an HOA, an entitled neighbor, someone trying to rewrite your family's history, I want to hear it. Share your story in the comments below. Let's remind these folks that community means respect, not control. And as for Karen, well, she doesn't show her face around the lake anymore. The willow tree still stands. The water still ripples. And my family's promise? Still strong as ever, because some legacies can't be paved over. Please subscribe my channel.